Hello, I am Betsy DeWitt. Welcome to the Brookline League of Women Voters ballot question discussion online. First, a few announcements. The League is sponsoring a townwide candidates forum on Sunday, April 18th at 4 p.m., also online. Be sure to read the voter's guide with information about all the candidates in the May 4th election, and that will be inserted in the Brookline tab on Thursday, April 22nd, and also available online at the League of Women Voters website. We thank the contributors who worked to update our current version of the voter's guide. This morning, we will discuss two ballot questions before voters on May 4th. Question 1. Shall the town vote to have its elected town clerk become an appointed town clerk of the town? And question 2, shall this town accept sections 3 to 7 of Chapter 44B of the General Laws of Massachusetts, also known as the Community Preservation Act? Our speakers on question 1 are Harry Bors, a member of the Town Committee on Organization and Structure and of the Advisory Committee, who has been asked to summarize the substance of the ballot question. And also Jeff Nutting, who is currently serving as a consultant in the town clerk's office since our elected clerk has been out on sick leave for more than a year. Jeff has been asked to speak on the skill sets required of the town clerk's position. And then finally, on question 1, Neil Gordon, a town meeting member and member of the advisory committee, who has been asked to discuss the arguments in opposition to ballot question 2. Neil is asked to discuss opposition on ballot question 1. I jumped ahead there, folks, apologize. Our speakers on question 2 are David Liscoyer, a longtime town meeting member who has studied the feasibility of adopting CPA, the Community Preservation Act, and was also petitioner for the warrant article that was passed at the fall town meeting, which was to put the question to the voters and why we now have the ballot question coming on May 4th. Second speaker is Lee Selwyn, a town meeting member and member of the advisory committee, who has been asked to discuss the arguments in opposition to ballot question 2. The Brookline League is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed discourse and active participation in government through voter education. The mission of the League is to protect the rights of all citizens to vote. This year, over the year, the League is planning a series of virtual discussions and biweekly articles in the local tab newspaper on town government, its history, structure, and organization. And now I will invite our first speaker on question 1, Harry Bors, to take over.
Good morning. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you to the League, and thank you to everyone who's here. So on to the ballot question. A local ballot question before us this May will ask us to change the way in which we hire the town clerk from an elected position, that is essentially one of public acclamation, to an appointed position, that is one hired through a process of a search committee, interviews, and ultimately an appointment by the select board after public hearings, which is a model used for our other senior department heads. Now, the history in Brookline is that for more than 30 years, we have had an elected town clerk. And historically, when the town clerk is retired, the acting assistant town clerk has run for office and won. This provided a continuance of trained, experienced, qualified people in the role. Now, though, our longstanding town clerk, Pat Ward, will not be standing for re-election. And our current longstanding assistant town clerk, Lena Goldberg, is retiring. So Brookline has no trained, experienced, qualified person standing in the wings to step into this very important and crucial position. So this creates both a situation of urgency as well as one of opportunity for timely change. Now, we've become accustomed to an elected town clerk, and some will say that it's important to continue that structure, for as they see it, this provides a direct connection with the voters. And to be sure, that is a poetic alignment of sorts. but it's also a somewhat nostalgic view that may not truly representative of the position. The role and complexity of the town clerk's position has changed tremendously over the last couple of decades. It's not merely an over-the-counter position registering voters and issuing various licenses. It is not an entry-level position. It's a highly complex senior-level position like others in our town, requiring hands-on management and oversight as you don't have a huge crew underneath you to do everything. It requires interacting with other town and school personnel in a data-driven environment regarding information storage and retrieval, understanding the various database softwares and applications, ensuring voter and census data accuracy, maintaining updates in our town archives. Now, some have voiced concern that should this ballot measure pass, that the select board and the town administrator could exert undue political influence. But keep in mind, in the past, in other municipalities, there have been complaints that elected town clerks have played favorites with regards to choosing voter registrars. Now, my sense is that is not an issue in Brookline, and I also don't think anyone here is ever going to confuse Brookline Town Hall with Tammany Hall. It's merely an illustration that conspiracy theories can really cut both ways. But in its most political of responsibilities, that is election oversight. The office is governed by a myriad of state and federal laws. What we do know is that Brookline needs to hire, process to be determined, a professional, trained, experienced, qualified town clerk. And currently, only registered Brookline town residents, meaning those from within Brookline, can apply, and that's through the process of election. And in fact, there is a name of a Brookline resident on the ballot this May, though I'm unaware that they've presented themselves as coming specifically with experience as either a town clerk or assistant town clerk. Now, changing the hiring structure from elected to appointed as proposed in the ballot measure would then allow the town to hire from beyond our own narrow borders. That is, to hire somebody from the largest, most qualified, diverse pool of applicants possible. And this is why the issue is on the May ballot. It will be up to the voters of Brookline to decide whether we hire our town clerk through a process of appointment or election. And in closing, I will just leave you with two brief things. One is, this past fall in the congressional primary elections, havoc ensued in Franklin, Massachusetts, where the Secretary of State found thousands of uncounted ballots. Now, this was under the management, or some may say mismanagement, of an elected town clerk, over whom the town administrator and the select board had no oversight power. No oversight, no accountability, no recourse. We should really take this as a cautionary tale. And then finally, I would just note that the current longstanding town clerk and assistant town clerk, those with the best insight into the history, workings, and needs of the town clerk's office, have both written very thoughtful, articulate, and insightful letters expressing their belief that it is essential for Brookline to move to an appointed town clerk model of hiring. And that's what I have for you. And I would be happy later to answer any questions that I may be able to answer. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Harry. And our next speaker, who will talk about the skill sets required in the town clerk's office, is our current sort of acting town clerk, Jeff Nutting. There, Jeff, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to follow on Harry's comments. I was asked to speak on some of the skill sets required of a town clerk here in Brookline. It's very much like a department head in many ways, with a couple of exceptions. Typically, a department head would come up through the ranks of whatever their profession is: fire chief, police chief, public works, treasurer, collector, etc., and learn a whole series of skill sets, laws, rules, regulations, procedures, and then ultimately step into the leadership role of a department head. And as a previous speaker said, we've done that for generations, with the assistant clerk stepping into the clerk's position when there was a vacancy. I think the big difference in this case is the department head for the town clerk has to be boots on the ground. the fire chief might be at a fire, but he's not squirting the hose, and the police chief may be at an incident, but he's directing. Here, you both have to be a director and you have to be a worker. You have to work the election, you have to work the census, you have to actually, do the same thing your staff does, and while directing them. So we don't have a huge staff where someone can just sit back and have everybody else do the work. So it is really important that you have the technical skills, and then you've developed leadership skills that any department head would have to build a strong team, to mentor their team, to provide professional development and educational opportunities to your employees, so that as the world changes in the clerk's office, they can change with it. Build redundancy so more than one person knows a procedure, so that if people leave or turn over. So as any leader, department head, those are the skills that you need when dealing with a staff. You have to be a team player with all the other department heads. During an election, we will touch the police, the fire, the DPW, the IT, the selectmen, the purchasing, the facilities, and who knows else. And you need the library, the senior center. You need to have a really good relationship and a team relationship, because you need their help, and at times they need your help. And certainly as a department head, you're on a team. When you're an elected official, you're kind of on the side a little. So that's a skill set. Customer service, clearly, the clerk's office is probably takes more phone calls from people that are not looking for us. They're looking for the traffic, the DPW, the billing department, etc. And so, having great customer service skills, not just at what we do, but what the town does is critical to the goodwill of the citizens. You have to be incredibly detail oriented and a great record keeper. We have records in our vaults that are hundreds of years old. We are making those same records today that will be a couple hundred years old before you know it. You have to be very organized, maintain a filing system, and again, redundancy and understanding how people can access that system. So we have state records, town records, we have election records, town meeting minutes, etc. So you have to be an organized person, and that kind of has to be your tilt to make that happen. Technical skills, like any other department head, we have 5 software programs, soon to add a 6th, relating to all the things that we do, dogs, vitals, state elections, committee software, public records requests, etc. So keeping up with those is, no different than the rest of the staff, because if you're answering the phone, you need to know how to use the software. You have to record the town meeting twice a year, if that's when you have it, and make sure the minutes are accurate, and then send any bylaw changes off to the Attorney General for approval. So you need that skill set to understand how to get that done in a timely fashion and maintain those records. And obviously run an election. Interestingly, we only average 2 elections a year, so it is the focus, but it's not the major time consumer that the rest of the office is. Obviously, the rules for Brookline's town election are exactly the same as every other town in the Commonwealth. So a town clerk has to follow those rules. There's no discretion, and make sure that it's done correctly. The selectmen, the select board choose where the precincts are located. They vote on the warrant and other things, but the town clerk has to run elections and not make mistakes that could embarrass the town or invalidate an election. So it's a typical department head with more hands-on than some.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we will move on to our final speaker, Neil Gordon. But first, I would like to say that there is a matter before the voters on May 4th that might present some confusion. And I'd like to try to clarify. It is possible that the candidate running for town clerk, actually likely because he's unopposed, will be elected. And it is also equally possible that the ballot question will pass. If that is the case, the elected town clerk will serve until such time as the new appointed town clerk has been identified and appointed by the select board. Therefore, the person running for town clerk would serve as an interim town clerk if the ballot question passes until an appointed town clerk has been identified. I hope that helps a little bit. Anyway, on to our final speaker, Neil Gordon, who's been asked to discuss arguments against passing ballot question 1.
And thank you. So I'm Neil Gordon. I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member and a member of the advisory committee. I'm also a Brookline constable, and in that capacity, I often chatted with Pat Ward, our current elected town clerk, and that's something that I miss. Pat rarely spoke of the long list of tasks that I'm sure the last speakers spoke about. Pat was more concerned with the non-technical and non-legal policy matters. Yes, policy matters, matters that are important to the public and the voting public in particular. Important questions like where you or your aging parent or neighbor will go to vote.
Just a few years ago in Precinct 2 and Precinct 8, that wasn't a hypothetical question. The school and the library were both closed for renovation. Pat worried about finding an accessible building or two, close enough to walk, but also with available parking on the street or otherwise. As an independently elected clerk, Pat's concern was, as always, the voters. There were also important questions about election security, the deterrent effect of police presence, even though the law doesn't require it, not only at the polls on election day, but for early voting too. Would a budget-pressured select board or town administrator make the same call? You know what Pat didn't worry about? He didn't worry about squeezing a couple of bucks out of his budget at the expense of the public. He didn't worry about pleasing any boss besides the voters. As our elected town clerk, Pat Ward protected the public, not with a gun or a badge, but with his heart and soul. There's some appeal, of course, to having an appointed clerk. Search from a wide pool of candidates and hire the best that applies. But I've seen the job description. It's long on technical skill, but short on the most important part of the job, protecting the public. It's long on head, and it's short on heart. 50 years ago, I served in the United States Navy on a capital ship with a crew of 1,200. I was a signalman. My captain, Walter Zartman, didn't know how to do my job. He also didn't know how to run the boilers or the engines, or fire the guns, or steer the ship, or operate the radars or the radios. He wasn't an electrician or a cook or a corpsman. There were hundreds of jobs he didn't know how to do, but there was one job he did know, the job he was vetted for. My captain knew how to lead. He knew how to care for his shipmates and his ship. Brookline voters are perfectly capable of electing a leader, and one who lives right here in Brookline. That elected town clerk can search for and hire an assistant who can live anywhere in the Commonwealth. All of the requisite technical skills can be staffed. Many of those skills already reside in the clerk's office. Unless you think running the clerk's office is a massive management undertaking, it's not. The staff is of modest size, and accepting some COVID hiccups, they do their job well. I know that Pat Ward is weighed in on making the clerk's position an appointed one. There's some appeal to that. But I know of the times that Pat stood up to the select board as a peer, as an independently elected town official. An elected town clerk is our independent voice, independent of select board politics, independent of fiscal pressures on the town as a whole. It's a voice that speaks for the public. Finally, lest you think we're simply too big a town to rely on an elected clerk, look around. We have an elected governor, but we also have an independently elected Secretary of State. Bill Galvin's duties include overseeing elections, and his job has the same sort of technical and legal requirements that we have locally. He hires for that. Anyone think we'd be better off if the governor appointed the official that controls our elections? There are other state and county officials that we independently elect. Maura Healy, our Attorney General, Deb Goldberg, our State Treasurer, Mike Morrissey, our Norfolk County DA, Pat McDermott, our Norfolk County Sheriff. And in Brookline, we hire independent library trustees and an independent school committee. I like that our town clerk is independent of the select board and of the town administrator. It's what's best for the public. It's why you should vote no on question 1. I thank you much.
Linda Goldberg, who is the assistant town clerk, is with us. Linda, can you add anything to what Jeff said about the skill sets that the position expects in its town clerk?
I'd like to emphasize that this is now a position that is, thank you. This is a position that has changed with the times. And I do feel that the best way to be able to fill the position is to have it go out to a wide range of people. And that would be by having this position become an appointed position.
I do have one question. Has the urgency to fill the clerk's position been a major force in driving the ballot question at this time? And I mean, I guess I'm going to say that I'm not clear that that is the major force. Perhaps Jeff or Linda, who've been in the office, do you have any thoughts about what pushed the ballot question?
I mean, I think it came out of the selectman's office. I think with Pat being out for such a long time and Linda retiring, I think some people just thought it's an opportune time to examine whether they stay the course or make a change, given what's gone on in the last year. So I don't think it was an urgency more than an opportunity to have the voters re-examine how they want to have the government and keep it the same or make a change. And so that's, I think.
Well, and in fairness, we didn't mention this, but there is a precedent about, 10 years ago, I'm guessing now. We did, as a community, decide that our treasurer, who had been an elected position, would be, for a variety of reasons, including the demands made on the position, become an appointed department head, which is comparable to what would happen if the clerk became an appointed position. So just for the record, we have both a candidate for this position on the ballot at the same time as this question is before the voters. So you'll be allowed to make your choice. And as I understand it, if the ballot question passes, the elected individual will serve until such time as an appointment can be made. In other words, there's no doubt about the fact that a candidate running for town clerk can and will be elected to that position, regardless of whether the ballot question passes. If the ballot question passes, that individual serves until such time as an appointed individual has been identified and appointed. Okay. Someone asked data about through the Commonwealth from town to town as elected versus appointed. Harry, I think you have that information from when you were compiling.
I don't have it in front of me, and I'm hoping maybe Jeff does. I don't
Yeah.
have those numbers with me. There has been a tendency to convert from elected to appointed throughout the state, though.
So there's about 100 clerks that are appointed in cities and towns. Obviously in a city they are, in towns. They tend to be the larger ones. You know, there's over half the communities in the Commonwealth are under 5,000 people. So you don't see that out in Western Mass at all generally, but in Eastern Mass, you'd see more of it. So it's still maybe 200, round numbers, 250 elected and 100 appointed. Those are round numbers.
Yeah, I think that information, when I was researching it, and it's not current in my mind, so I'm not trying to give you any. I think the Secretary of State's office had was able to give numbers of clerks elected versus appointed to answer the question from a reliable source. Okay, I do not see another question. So we're going to move on. It's question 2. And just to remind everybody, the second question is, shall the town accept sections 3 to 7 of chapter 44B of the general laws of Massachusetts, also known as the Community Preservation Act, which is, I think this is the third time this question has become the vote before the voters of Brookline. And I am going to ask David Lescoyer, the He's a longtime town meeting member. He has studied the feasibility of adopting CPA for many, many years. And he was the petitioner for the warrant article that was passed at the fall town meeting. So wherever you are, I hope. Can you hear
I'm
me,
here.
David? Okay, good.
I hear.
And then after David speaks, we'll hear from Lee Selwyn, who is a town meeting member and a member of the advisory committee, and he will be presenting arguments that are in opposition to question 2. So David, you have the floor to
Thank you.
explain
Thank you very
CPA.
much. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing these forums. It's really important that voters be informed about what they're voting on. They're going to show up on election day or for early voting and have this question on the ballot. And I'm sure that they'll feel much more comfortable casting their vote if they understand what it's all about, which is what I'm going to try to do today. That Community Preservation Act was passed in the year 2000. It's one of many laws that are local options. That is, it provides some benefits or requirements or whatever that the town can either adopt or not. And this one has come on the ballot. Actually, I think once before in 2006, and it was rejected at that time. And we'll discuss a little bit about why. But first, we need to maybe review a little bit about what that law says and what it offers to Brookline. It is a local option that says that if the town agrees to raise at least a surcharge on its property tax of at least 1% and up to 3%, but in Brookline, this time we've written the language so that it's 1%, no ifs, ands, or buts. Then the Commonwealth, through funds that have been collected through the registries by real estate transfer fees, will match that money. So already Brookline's contributing to that statewide trust fund about $500,000 a year. And if the voters pass question 2, not only will we no longer be sending money to benefit other communities, but in place of that, we'll be gaining another $670,000 to match the $2.3 million that the surcharge would raise. That's a total of around $3 million we expect as the revenue for community preservation purposes. Now, this isn't money that the town can use for anything that's coming. It's very targeted and specific money. It's for things that probably otherwise the town wouldn't manage to do because its budget is very tight. There are many demands and a lot of having to balance all of those needs. So here's some money for 4 specific purposes that are allowed under this act: the acquisition of open space, preservation of historic assets in the town, acquisition and improvement of recreational facilities, parks, sports fields and the likes, and community housing, which is the Community Preservation Act term for what is actually affordable housing. So now under those categories, the act allows the town to do acquisition. That's for open space, historic properties, recreational facilities, and housing. It can also create open space and recreational facilities and housing, but not historic, obviously. That's already exists. You can't create historic. And also another allowed use is preservation of all of these properties and assets in the town. This would be to bring them back to their intended use, reparations and improvements. And for housing, in addition to those acquire, create, and preserve purposes, there's also a purpose or use that's called support. So that would be things like rental assistance and advocacy and planning and soft costs associated with affordable housing projects. So all of that, those funds come together into a trust fund for Brookline, which is administered by a community preservation committee. And the law allows up to 9 members of this committee, and 5 of them are prescribed by the law: a member of the planning board, the housing authority, the conservation commission, and the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the Historic Commission. The other 4 are at large and can be appointed by the select board. And they're there because the Community Preservation Committee is really deciding on which projects which would come to the committee as proposals from any part of the town department, or others, nonprofits. They have to then allocate those funds to various purposes within the constraints of the Community Preservation Act. So the other 4 members are critical, because this is really is for all of the communities that do it, it is a community guided, community-driven process. It's up to the community itself to guide and allocate and determine how the funds are used. So now I would say that it's important for everyone to know that, unlike often with Brookline, we're sort of cutting edge, leading the way in what we do as a town. In this case, we're already 187 communities that have adopted this, and it's come around now a second time. First time it was proposed at 3%, and many people felt that that was too much. But now, having learned from that, we've backed it off to the 1% that I think now most people feel is possible and comfortable. And what does it mean for an individual taxpayer? Well, look at your tax bill. Like an $8,000 tax bill is sort of in the middle, typical. Some are much more, some are much less. 1% of that is $80 a year, $20 a quarter. So yes, there is concern about increasing taxes, which this does, but this surcharge, unlike overrides, exempts low-income households and moderate-income senior households. So it's a more friendly kind of surcharge, in that the ones that we're very concerned about the impact on are actually exempted and can apply for an exemption. Now I just wanted to mention what's happened in some other neighboring communities, because another important thing that voters, I would like voters to know, is that these funds have been used in the 186 other communities as floor money, as leverage money, as money to leverage other resources from other state departments, from the federal government, from private sources. In Newton, for every $20 of CPA money, Newton has managed to leverage an additional $80. So it's just, opened all kinds of opportunities and potentials in Newton. Newton was among the first communities. And in Somerville, which more recently adopted the Community Preservation Act, for every $40 that the CPA is providing, the city of Somerville has leveraged another $60. So first of all, there's the match that comes from the state, and then there's the creative use of the money by the committee, so that it leverages additional money well beyond the $3 million that we expect to get, at least at the beginning. So thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, David. Okay, just so that everybody understands, there's also a warrant article that will be before town meeting, this coming annual town meeting, that would establish the Community Preservation Committee should the ballot question pass. Be curious to know if the committee, well, never mind. It just simply to say there is a warrant article that would create a community preservation commission. Is it commission, David? No,
It's committee.
committee.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
community
it's
preservation.
the
committee.
warrant article is following the specifications of the state law.
Of the, yeah, right, of the legislature. Okay, Mr. Selwyn, welcome. And would you like to tell us what the arguments against passing this might be?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this. Ernie Frey recruited me for this because I think I was one of the relatively few people at town meeting who voted against it, against the warrant article. I'm not actively involved one way or the other on this issue, but I'm happy to share with you why I voted against it and why I am planning to vote no on question 2. I have long been a supporter of historic preservation. My wife, for example, served as chair of the Brookline Preservation Commission for some 20 years. So we've been involved in historic preservation and have long supported it. Unfortunately, I don't know that this that the Community Preservation Act actually accomplishes what I think a lot of people think it's supposed to be doing. I put together just some summary slides to sort of run this. Now I'll see if I can accomplish what in terms of technical let me see if I can make this happen.
Ah, there we go.
No. Okay. Is that working?
We've got your screen, we've got your slides up.
Okay, good. So why I'm voting no on question 2. First, the Brookline has had a series of overrides over the past 7 or 8 years. I served on the first of the override study committees back in 2014, 2015, which was the first of what became a succession of overrides. We've had big ones and we've had little ones, and this is probably in the category of a little one, but nevertheless, it still fits that pattern. But let me talk to you about my understanding of the CPA and why I think that it's problematic. The statute provides for minimum allocations of funds in 3 categories: historic preservation 10%, open space 10%, and affordable housing 10%. Now, that translates into the distinct possibility that as much as 80% of the amount collected could be earmarked for affordable housing. And given the attention that town meeting has been focusing on with respect to affordable housing, I think that is a possibility that voters have to consider. So what is driving? I want to talk about housing because, again, as I said, if this weren't about affordable housing, I would be supporting it. Over the past 5 years or so, Boston and Cambridge added over 100,000 jobs, and Brookline actually lost 1,600 jobs. So jobs are driving the demand for housing, and yet we're not the ones responsible for adding those jobs. The tax burden in these 3 municipalities is very different in terms of the sources of the money. Over the coming 6 years, Boston is projected to collect over $1 billion in property tax from essentially commercial and industrial entities. Cambridge, 320 some odd million, and Brookline, almost nothing, 17 million over a 6-year period. The tax burden is being picked up heavily by the job creators, but unfortunately, it's staying in the towns where the jobs are created and not going to the towns where people who are taking these new jobs want to live. So Brookline, in fact, is becoming the bedroom for these additional jobs. And it is that source of employment in these other communities that is one of the principal drivers of affordable housing in here in Brookline. And the problem that creates is that we're picking up citizens, residents of Brookline are being asked to basically pick up an enormous burden to basically accommodate the growth in Boston, Cambridge, and some other nearby communities. 83% of our property tax levy is coming from residents. In Boston, it's only 42%. In Cambridge, even with all of the not-for-profit institutions in Cambridge that are tax exempt, only 35% of their total revenue, total property tax revenue is coming from residents, but here, 83%. So we're being asked to continue to fund, among other things, affordable housing. We've been doing that for the past, there's been pressure for that for the past several years. There are groups in town meeting that are avid supporters of expanding affordable housing, and that I'm afraid that despite the fact that David talked about how the community will make the decisions, I think the community right now in Brookline is going to make the decision to earmark, if not the full 80%, but a pretty large chunk of the CPA money for that purpose. So, you know, finally, the point that I think that I'm concluding with is that, you know, we are basically picking up the financial burden of supporting subsidized housing when these other communities are capturing enormous amounts of tax revenue. I'm in the wrong direction here. We've had multiple overrides, and Boston and Cambridge haven't had any overrides for at least 32 years. So I think this sort of spells out, you know, really the essence of the problem. And I think that the CPA, as it's presently structured, is simply going to contribute to that and add more burden on Brookline taxpayers in what, in my view, is an unjustified manner that we should not be supporting. So that's my reason for voting against the question 2.
Thank you, Lee. We have a request to speak. I guess I'm going to say first, since if we allow a second person to speak on this topic, then David is going to be given an opportunity to respond. However, I'm willing to provide some time. So Ms. Friedman, where are you?
Am I still screen sharing? Because I don't know how to get rid of it if I am.
Oh dear. I think we have to.
I think you may have. I think you may have to.
Can I undo it? I don't know.
I think you. I think you can. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Good.
Thank you.
All right. So Paula Friedman would like to comment, which we can offer, but I also must explain, and David, you may be prepared to respond, since this is turning closer to a debate than was expected or intended or was part of our original request. Ms. Friedman, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, Betsy, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. I will be very brief. I agree with everything that David said and everything that Lee said, but I am concerned about affordable housing for everyone in Brookline, not just some. I want to talk about some numbers. First, I just want to say, I want to talk about tax increases that are already in the pipeline, but have not kicked in yet, based on debt exclusions and overrides that have already been passed. Okay, I know that you can't read this, but we're going to have another slide that will be a little clearer. This is information from the town treasurer's office about debt exclusions for Ridley, Newbury, and the high school and Driscoll, and overrides that were passed in 9, 16, and 19. Here are some numbers just very quickly. For a home that is assessed at $500,000, current taxes are this much. I'm not going to read the numbers. You can read the numbers. Yes. Pardon me?
Not over yet?
Current taxes are this much. This is how much has not yet kicked in, and this is how much the CPA would add. For a home that is 2 million, these are the numbers. This has not yet kicked in. CPA would add an additional 166. For a home that is 4 million, this is how much current taxes are. This is what has not yet kicked in, and the CPA would add this much. In addition, these have not yet been added in: the firehouse, Pierce School override, and an operational override, all of which are planned but have not yet added to the tax burden for every taxpayer in Brookline. So the consequence of all these put together is to make Brookline less affordable for everyone. There are other opportunities, and David talked about these a little bit, but I'm going to talk about them specifically. There are resources currently available from the federal government, the state government, private philanthropy, and grants, so that we don't have to add to the tax burden. And I just hope that we will try to keep Brookline affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, now, David?
Yes, I'd be happy to
And I'm
comment.
just going to comment in general that one of the aspects of CPA is that it's specifically designed to leverage money that might not be available if we hadn't passed it. But David,
Your husband at the hearing at the advisory committee explained that he's a member of the state's historic commission, and they receive proposals from communities all over the state. And he said, sitting in that chair, these proposals come to us, and the ones that have a CPA match are much more competitive for us and much more likely to be funded. So this is a leg up in historic preservation. The same is true with Parks and Rec, with the Department of Environmental Affairs. It's also true in housing with the Department of Housing and Community Development. It puts Brookline in a much stronger position. And as I mentioned, for every $20 of CPA funds in Newton, they've managed to leverage an additional $80. Now, regarding Paula's figures, she presented these slides at the Livable Community Action Committee, and Susan Granoff, who led that meeting, kindly provided me with the slides. I have had a chance to take a look at the figures, and unfortunately, there is a pretty fundamental error in her calculations, which exaggerates the impact of the overrides, because she's counted the overrides twice. First of all, they're already incorporated into the levy as it currently exists at 228 million. And then she says they're in the pipeline. They can't be both in the pipeline and already in the levy. So it is true that taxes in Brookline are going up. the Citizens for Limited Taxation, Barbara Anderson, in 1980, passed the Proposition 2.5, which limits the growth in the town's levy to 2.5% per year. And then actually with new growth, that adds another 1% or so, but that compounds. So using the rule of 72 at 3.5% per year compounding, taxes in Brookline are going to double in 20 years. So this is part of, and I think that Lee Selman has expressed very well the decision that the residents and voters in Brookline need to decide to balance all of these benefits that this offers within the context of the community as a whole. Actually, Brookline's growth in housing, the number of units created in housing, according to the Brookline's housing production plan, is minuscule compared to the number of units that have been built in Cambridge and Boston. So the point is, I would turn it absolutely on its head that Cambridge and Boston have stepped up and they're building thousands of units per year. We can see it just over the border to the north of Brookline in Alston and Brighton. Meanwhile, there's been very little construction, very little expansion in Brookline, and the prices in Brookline have for rent and housing have gone through the roof. We have a community where over 30% of the residents of Brookline, and this isn't poor people, 30% are housing cost overburdened now, particularly with the younger people coming in with families. They're having a tough time handling their student loans, taking care of their parents, paying daycare for their kids, and rent for their house. They're really stretched. And so we need this Community Preservation Act in order to make Brookline work for all of Brookline, including the next generation. We don't want to become a community that only the baby boomers can afford, privileged baby boomers. We need to continue to be a conveyor belt, and that's part of the Community Preservation Act can help to establish and maintain that principle, which is the any community that wants to remain viable and strong needs to look at all of its generations and all the interests of the community as a whole. And that's why it's been very popular around the state. It's used differently in different areas. Yes, in the eastern part of the state, there is more priority on housing. In other parts of the state, there's more priority on open space, recreation, historic preservation. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Brookline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I would like to say thank you to all of our speakers. We do try to present both sides of information, both pro and con information to help people decide how to vote. And the final decision is up to the voter. And we truly believe that the voters are better informed when they've listened to the arguments that would support or not support one of these ballot questions. But just to be clear, the League is a nonpartisan organization and it encourages informed discourse, active participation, and we support voter education. So having said that, I thank our speakers. This has been very helpful. I hope people have learned something from it. The session will be recorded. We'll do a little polishing because of our crazy technical difficulties when we got started. And it will be available eventually online through BIG, our local access TV. But we will also have a link to it on our website. And then I would like to just remind everybody that the League is sponsoring a countywide candidates forum on Sunday, April 18th at 4 p.m. And we also remind everybody to look for the voter's guide that will be printed in the Brookline tab on April 22nd. and we'll have information about all candidates, including town meeting candidates. And then it will become accessible online through the Brookline League's website. And we appreciate all of the individuals, the candidates, as well as the committee that helped to put this together. It's quite a challenging task, but we try to do our best to provide the best information for voters to help them making their choices and decisions. It's up to the voters in the end. So thank you all for being with us. We appreciate the discussion on ballot question 1, and we appreciate the discussion on ballot question 2. Just to be clear to everybody, ballot question 1 is whether or not the town will decide to have an elected town clerk or an appointed town clerk. The question on the ballot is to choose to have an appointed town clerk. And the ballot question 2 is whether or not the town will accept the Community Preservation Act for all of the reasons that you've heard from our speakers. So we thank everyone, and we hope to see you again at the Candidates Forum on Sunday, April 18th at 4 p.m. So thanks all and farewell.